What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Get Real Bass Fishing. Today we are back trying to avoid the wind. It seems like my only days off I have to avoid the wind, and it's just blowing 30 miles an hour, but that's all we got. I tried a couple different spots. There was a bunch of landscaping in the other quiet spot, so now I'm just hunkering down next to a bridge. Hopefully the wind isn't too bad in the microphone because it's still not perfect. But today we're going to be answering a question, or trying to answer a question that we get probably more than any other question. One is, how do we fish a bucktail? And two, what trailers do I put on a bucktail? And honestly, it is probably one of the most frequently asked questions in the DMs or in the comments, so let's get to it. Let's go. All right, so first off, I am going to, I guess I'm gonna say this, and I think this is the best way to explain working a bucktail. And in my own personal opinion, I'm no John Skinner, I'm no crazy Alberto, but in my own opinion, I feel like fishing a bucktail, it's more about being able to present the bucktail as opposed to working the bucktail. So we get a bunch of questions like, how do I work a bucktail? How do I work a bucktail in an inlet or in the back bay or on the ocean? I just can't ever catch a fish on a bucktail. And I think the biggest thing is you're just not presenting the bucktail right. Like, this is a hunk of lead with some tail on it, and that's all it is just a hunk of lead. It doesn't have action per se. You know, it's there. It's more of just being there. So I'm going to start off with the trailers. We'll get into how to present a bucktail. So I'm going to start talking about the lighter bucktails first, and then we'll get into the bigger ones that we fish in the inlets and on the ocean side, on the beaches and all that. All right, so let's start talking about a 1/4 ounce. So these, I couldn't find a good 1/4 ounce bucktail anywhere, so I hand tied these myself. I pour them, paint them, all that stuff. And these are actually on sale on the Smooch and Release website, so I'll link these down below. But I think what a lot of people do is they overlook the smaller bucktails. It's a little bit more difficult to fish a, let's say, 1/4 ounce bucktail or even a 1/2 ounce bucktail with a big surf rod when it comes to the type of actions that most of us have. We have 1 or 2 surf rods. There's gonna be guys that have a bunch of technique specific surf rods, and that's cool. They have stuff for this. But for most of us, we have 1 or 2 surf rods. We don't have we don't have $800 to drop on multiple rods. So here we have a 1/4 ounce bucktail, and when it comes to fishing these, I like to throw them on lighter rods, whether it's a 7-foot or close to an 8-foot. I like medium fast or a medium light action rod. That way I can feel the bait more. I'm not pulling up on like a 9-foot medium heavy where the bait's just going boom, just like that. I mean, you raise your tip like that to jerk up a 9 or 10-foot rod, and you're moving this little guy all the way up in the water column. But if you're fishing a 7 or 8 foot for a 1/4 ounce, whether it's a medium fast or a medium light like that, your action on the rod is actually absorbing the action on the bait itself as well. And you're just moving it up. Let's say you're moving the rod tip this much on a 7-foot, you're absorbing most of that before the bait even moves. So I like to use a lighter, a smaller rod. So like I said, 7 or 8 foot. My favorite is the St. Croix Legend Tournament Inshore. They're, I want to say like 315. I'll link those down below as well. But when it comes to throwing light stuff, you need light gear. I also prefer, I started using, or I usually use like a 3000 size Shimano Stratic or Nasky. I'm actually favoring more towards the 4000. I feel like I can get farther casts with it with the lighter line as opposed to the 3000. So I would suggest a 4000 Nasky. They're $100. You really can't go wrong with it. I got a bunch of them, and I've caught plenty of big fish on them. Obviously, I'm not pulling up a 50 on a 4000 or a 3000 just because of where I'm fishing with it. But it could probably do it from a boat. So let's talk trailers. We talked a little bit about how to actually get a setup for it. So as you can see on this 1/4 ounce, we have a curly tail. And then on this one, we have a split fork tail trailer. And when the bait is more finicky, or I guess when the bite is more finicky and I can't seem to be catching any stripers, I'll lean more towards the forktail because that's less action but still a presentation there, as opposed to the curly tail, which has a ton of action. So if we're in a little bit warmer water, not hot water, because that's like, that almost turns off the bite. But if we're in warmer water where fish are really active, bait are moving around fast, and you can actually see some boiling going on or hear some action, that's when I'm gonna lean more towards a curly tail. And we sell those too. We got these on the website, 4-inch, 5-inch, doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter on the 1/4 ounce, 4 or 5. The 4 is gonna be a little bit smaller, obviously, and the 5 is gonna be a little bit bigger, but it's all about that extra action on that bucktail. Like I said, these there's really nothing to them. It's a hunk of lead with some deer tail, and the deer tail doesn't move like a silicone skirt. So the more that you can put off there, if there's an active bite, the better. So a curly tail. And then if the bite, if it's cold, things are slowing down, you don't see bait moving around as fast, they're just kind of going with the flow. Or if there's shrimp or if there's squid around, that's when I'm gonna lean more towards a forktail. And we sell these on the website as well. We've had them at shows, we've told the stories about them. The forktail and a finicky bite, whether it's on a bucktail or just on a regular old jig head, produces fish. So that's what I like to use on the smaller bucktails. And we're gonna get into different trailers for the bigger bucktails. So while I'm talking about the big bucktails, we'll talk about how to actually present these bucktails, and really it's really the same thing for big or small. So let's move into some larger bucktails. So those were 1/4 ounce bucktails. We have a bunch on the website actually. I think we go up to 2 ounce on some of them. But the biggest that I'm really fishing is a 1.5 ounce bucktail. There are some special occasions where I'm throwing a 2 ounce, but that is very rare for me. I seem to be able to present how I need to with the lighter ones as opposed to the bigger ones. So right here we have a 1 ounce bucktail, Spike's bucktail, and on here you can see that it's a little bit different than what we had. We had a curly tail on the 1/4 ounce, and then we also had that fork tail on the 1/4 ounce. On here we actually have a swim bait. So this is a brand new swim bait that I put on here, brand new bucktail just for this video. But when it comes to being able to kick off and attract more with vibration or sound, like in a back bay, moving current, a little bit more flash, a curly tail is great. So you can always use a curly tail no matter what, but a swim bait, if you want to be able to hop it and have that blah 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 sound, it's a swim bait. Just make sure when you get swim baits, make sure that boot tail or that paddle tail, whichever one you get, sticks out farther than that deer tail, because if it doesn't, it's going to get caught up in that deer tail and it's not going to paddle. It's just going to be there and kind of just be useless. That's why those larger fork tails or larger curly tails are a little bit better on the 1/4 ounce because of the amount of fur. But this is a 6 cents swim bait. This is a Divine swim bait. I think that one is a 3.2 or 3.8 that I threw on here for my 1 ounce, and they catch fish. I don't know if you saw on Instagram, I actually posted one of my biggest bass, my first bass of the year, largemouth. I caught on a chatterbait with the Divine swim bait as a trailer. They make really good trailers, and they now sell them up to 5.3 inches, so you're gonna see a lot of those on my bucktails this year. I just love swim baits. Like I said, with the little guys, it's just a hunk of lead with some deer tail. There's really no action to them. So if you can add action when there's a hot bite, you're gonna catch more fish. Here is another 1 ounce, and it has a good old beat up curly tail. They're just, see how much farther down that goes? So if you want, put that curly tail on there. It's gonna do a whole flip, spin around, and you're gonna catch more fish. When it comes to some really, really durable curly tails, we have Fat Cow. So I don't know if you guys have, everyone always seems to ask, what's that red thing that you have hanging out of your bucktail? What's that red curly thing? And they are Fat Cow strips. I believe these are the 5 or 6 inch. I can't remember. The bigger the better. That's just how it is. I also use the Forktail from Fat Cow. It's basically just a straight red piece and it's forked. So that just adds that extra little subtlety to it, as opposed to the curly tail where it's just gonna be all crazy. And why do we put these on here, and why specifically red? I have had the most best experience with red. I've also caught a lot on the chartreuse. I like to use chartreuse when it comes to a little bit dirtier water. That way it's a little bit more visible. There's no lip on here, there's no rattle on here, so there's nothing to attract a fish from farther away if you don't have a curly tail or something on it. And in my opinion, same thing with freshwater. Chartreuse is great, red is great for dirty water, but red I lean more towards just bleeding. These are red and whites, and that's one of my favorites to throw. The red represents the gills, and the extra curly tail or the fork tail that I have in red represents a bleeding bait. With that, it puts off action, it puts off some vibration and maybe a little sound, but overall, it puts off that presentation that will attract a fish that sees the red. All right, so we have a bunch of different trailers that we went over. Just to go over before I talk about how to present, we got a swim bait, we got a fork tail, we have a curly tail, soft plastic, and a curly tail fat cow. When it comes to bucktail fishing, I feel like it's more about the presentation as opposed to how you work it. So let's use this bridge for example. If we're back here, there's obviously going to be current going from one side to the other. Fish are going to be hunkering down those pylons, those little concrete pillars here that we see, and they're just going to be sitting there on one side or the other, whether they're sitting on the up current side waiting for bait to come down or on the down current side waiting for bait to come down. They're going to be sitting in those zones. There's going to be excess drop-offs. There's going to be a point where all of a sudden there's a drop-off, and that is where the boats are going to go through, and then it'll end up getting shallower and shallower. But a lot of times these fish are sitting in those channels, those fish highways. They're going to be sitting around the pillars, and they're just going to be sitting there waiting for bait to go down and attack. So that's where the bucktail comes in handy for me. Personally, I tend to fish bucktails more around moving water as opposed to like a standstill water. I fish from the shore, I fish moving water. I like currents, I like seams, I like drop-offs, and that's where the bucktail comes in handy for me. So let's say these fish are at the end of our cast, and let's say they're in the middle of the water column. This is probably the easiest way to explain fishing off a bridge or fishing next to a bridge for striped bass. If they're higher in the water column, I'm going to try to fish a lighter bucktail. That way I can stay up a little bit more, because it's easier to get fish to come up for a bait as opposed to go down for a bait. So keep that in mind. Top water would probably work as well if they are in the higher water column. But let's say they're at the end of the cast. We're going to throw a 1.5 ounce bucktail. We're going to throw it up current. We're not going to throw it at them, because by the time it gets down to a level that they're going to even see, because they're not just most likely sitting on top, they're going to be down a couple feet. By the time it gets down to that, it's probably going to be drifted down away from where the school is. So we're going to cast up current, and a lot of times when I'm fishing the bucktail, if they're in the middle of the water column, I like to let it sit for a couple seconds and then pop it and then just work it on its way down. We're going to follow the bait kind of like that until we either feel fish or get a bite. So that is essentially the presentation of a bucktail when it comes to moving water. That's a lot for inlets, that's for bridges, that's for moving back bays. When it comes to the ocean, it's a completely different thing. We're gonna be casting as far as we can. I like hard water, I like moving water, I like rough water for the bucktails. A lot of times the stripers are just cruising around that white water, getting distracted bait, disoriented bait, and they're just attacking. So I like a bigger presentation in the surf with more water, bigger water, higher water. So that's where I'm gonna go and lean more towards like a 1.5 or a 2 ounce or a 2.5 ounce, depending also on the wind. if I have wind right against me, chances are that sweep's coming up really, really high and it's super dangerous. So I gotta be able to cast as far as possible, but also I need to be able to get it as far as possible. So the bigger presentation with the deer tail is more wind resistant, or less wind resistant. It picks up more wind, so it's not gonna cast out as far. That's where these more aerodynamic bucktails come into play. So a 2.5 or a 3 ounce bucktail with a minnow head, we sell these on the website as well, will be more likely to get you where you need to be and if wind is against you on the beach. But also they cut down better in the water, so you'll be able to get down a little bit further in the big sweep or big rough water as well. With that presentation, once we have our bait in the water, I do the same thing. I let it sit down. I just try to figure out where the fish are. Pay attention to how long you cast out, let it sit. So if you let it sit 1, 2, 3 and you're popping it and you're not reeling too fast, so it's staying a little bit lower in the water column, and all of a sudden you hook into a fish, do that at the same time, because chances are they're just all sitting down there on the bottom, maybe getting mole crabs, other crabs, sand eels, where if you cast it out and you're just trying to keep it from going all the way to your right and it's getting up in the water column and staying high, they're not going to see it. They're not going to go after it because they're facing down already. That's where being able to get a bait below them is a little bit better off than trying to get a bait above them. When it comes to the type of rod that I like to use, whether it's the inlets or, let me just say, bigger bucktails, so anything most likely over 3/4 ounce, so 1 ounce, 1.5, 2, 3. I don't usually go over 3. That's just, you want shoulder pain, fish a bucktail over 3 ounces. But anything along those lines, those larger ones with the big old 7s or 8/0 hooks, 9/0 hooks, I like to use a heavier action rod. So a medium heavy, moderate fast, or a medium heavy fast, or a medium heavy. Just something that I'm gonna be able to actually load those big bucktail hooks into a fish's mouth without just being like, ha, cool, just a regular old noodle rod, and we didn't get any penetration. So you want something, especially when you're throwing those big hooks, that's gonna be able to set the hook into a hard mouth of a fish. When you're throwing, let's say, 1/2 ounce or 1/4 ounce, if you throw something like a 9-foot medium heavy, you're most likely just gonna make a big old hole in the mouth and just rip that bait out and or bend the hook out. So the rods aren't the same for all of the bucktails. Pay attention to what size hook you have in the bucktails that you purchase, and then use them accordingly with the correct rods. You guys already know I recommend the St. Croix Siege in all of those actions: 9-foot, 10-foot, 10-foot 6, medium, moderate fast, medium heavy fast, medium heavy, moderate fast. I prefer those. If you ask anybody, I break rods all the time, and I have not broken my St. Croix Sieges. So if that's a testament to how they're built, then use that, because I always break rods, and that's probably where all of my money has gone, was replacing rods. So if you guys have any more questions, if you want to buy some really durable bucktails, I'll link everything down below. Comment your questions down below, because we have an entire year of fishing. I want to help you guys catch some fish, so don't be afraid to comment down below. If you are new to the channel, go ahead and hit that red subscribe button and go watch some more videos on the channel. We got a bunch of tutorials on there and a lot of cool fishing videos. We're just waiting for the season to open up and catch some fish so we can start posting some more videos. Besides that, we got a lot more teaching to do. We got a lot more how-to videos. Thank you guys for watching. Stay real, smooch and release, and have some fun on the water. We'll see you.
Without my love for the ocean, I would be long gone by now. It's some kind of devotion.